Sugar is the enemy. Alcohol's an enemy. The ability to be sedentary is the enemy. The ability not to get into deep reparative sleep. All these things that we think about truly starts in the mouth. And that's why we love to say that oral health, the health of the mouth, will lead to overall health.
This is the Home of Healthspan podcast, where we profile health and wellness role models, sharing their stories and the tools, practices, and routines they use to live a lively life. Dr. Levine, it is a pleasure to have you on the show, and I am excited to dive into your work and everything you've done in the past and are currently doing. But before I do so, how would you describe yourself?
I would describe myself as a troublemaker who's a change agent in my industry.
Okay, troublemaker who's a change agent, and change for good. No
That's
doubt.
what I hope.
Yeah. So we were talking just before you jumped in. I was actually at the dentist yesterday for myself and for my daughter. We went together, and so let's get into kind of your journey. How did you get into oral health, oral care, and what you're doing now?
For me, it was interesting enough that it was a process of elimination. I was at Cornell. I was a lacrosse player, immunology, microbiology major. You know, I had not a great experience in hospitals with grandparents who unfortunately passed away. And I liked working with my hands. I was doing some sculpture and some art also at Cornell. And so I looked at the kind of the opportunities in front of me. And what's interesting is I didn't think I liked business either, because I grew up around a dinner table. My dad was in one of the oldest industries in the country called the fur business. And that was a crazy, kind of older industry, not organized. Everybody had, what they owed each other was like on a handshake. Nothing was really, there was no organizational type of approach to it. And so, business, and I'd hear about conflict around the dinner table. I said, that's not for me. And I gravitated more towards the science. I don't know how many people can empathize with that, but I think as a growing up person around that dinner table, we learn a lot. And so I ended up saying, wow, I think dentistry could be interesting. And I literally jumped into it with that kind of background. I had such a great college experience also with athletics, because we ended up with a great coach winning a national championship, Division I lacrosse. Amazing. But it set me from a standpoint of my perspective that you want to do anything, you got to do it as a team. And when you set a big vision and you go after it. And so dentistry was very solo, very fragmented. And so since the day I got into it, which is at this point 3.5 decades, I've been trying to improve it and change it. And that's why I think of myself as a big troublemaker.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, can you give some examples when you've been trying to improve it and change it? Like, where did that start?
Yeah.
What was the first thing you saw and you say, hey, this is broken, this needs to change?
Yeah. So I got out of Boston University Goldman School. That's where I did my pre-doctoral. And then I did my post-grad work at NYU as a specialist. I'm what's known as a prosthodontist that studies aesthetics, but also structure function biology. And when I started my practice, I started building a team around myself. And then I started learning about organizational theory, and a bunch of us as specialists worked with a guy who brought those concepts. I started reading all these great books about discipline of market leaders and every business, a growth business, Ram Charan, Noel Taishi, and all these great authors. And I started saying, wow, I love business because it's just like being on a team and a team sport. And it's the same analogy of performance and high performance team and building culture and all this great stuff. So I said, wow, let's go build teams. And the first foray into business was we put our practices together under an umbrella, raised money. And I started learning very quickly at a very young age that whole dance about raising money from a private equity standpoint, having a board, having accountability, having multiple locations. And then, from there, I went on for 2 more companies. But and at the same time, I always practice because I love practicing. I love what I do with aesthetics and reconstructive dentistry. So it was always, for me, the tug of trying to do both and trying to do them well. And the only way I would ever have any chance of doing it well was building high performance teams. So I learned that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I'd love to dig more into oral health and how it fits into overall health. So we typically talk about Healthspan of around 5 pillars: fitness, nutrition, sleep and recovery, stress management, and social connection. And I think a lot of people listening are probably familiar with Andrew Huberman and his podcast. He has 6 where he adds sunlight, but then maybe a year or so ago, he had a oral hygiene expert on and said, hey, I think we need to add oral health as a 7th pillar here. And so that's why I was so excited to speak with you. I had a friend who was a journalist, and years ago, she said she was speaking with Dr. Oz and said, hey, for people aging, what are the most important things? And he said 3 things. 1, to keep stretching so you stay mobile. 2, to have fresh plants in your home so you're getting fresh air. And 3, to take care of your mouth, because it's when you start losing your teeth, you eat softer foods, your nutrition goes down, and it's just this cascading. You lose lean mass. And so it ties to nutrition. It ties to fitness and movement. It ties to your stress management. It impacts all these things, because imagine the microbiome in your mouth, right, can lead to mental health issues. So what do you see in this space as kind of it's evolved on how important people recognize it to be?
Yeah, I love what you just said. I did the oral health segments with Mehmet. I know him very well, and I'm so psyched that he said that. And of course, I'm a tremendous fan of Huberman. I add that pillar to longevity, my thinking, and it's really about the oral health and the microbiome. So not only is there a functional problem as we age, because as we age, our ability to fight infection, our immune response goes down. Well, 60-70% of the American public has some form of periodontal disease, chronic inflammation in the mouth. So you take that fact and now understand that there's 54 systemic inflammatory diseases that are connected to inflammation in the mouth. Just name any of them. So the big one, cardiovascular disease, number 1 killer in America, diabetes, cognitive function disease, pancreatic cancer, low birth weight babies, leaky gut, and interstitial cell leakage. So when you realize that and you know, hey, what is this bacteria called P. gingivalis, which is one of the number 1 7 pathogens in the mouth. There's 7 of them that are the bad bacteria, right? It's just like the gut. The same rules apply to the mouth. The gut is the largest microbiome of the body, 7-8 trillion. The mouth is the second largest, 7-8 billion, 600 species. So what they find when this balancing act is off and the environment in the mouth, and we can talk about what is that environment that causes a dysbiosis, right? That symbiosis gets out of whack, and all of a sudden you have a overgrowth from the diversified microbiome, which was healthy, to one where you're outnumbered by the pathogens. These bugs end up 20 years ago in VEST studies, Moise Devereaux out of Columbia, in the carotid artery of cardiovascular diseases. Dana Orange, rheumatoid arthritis, I'll bring it up to today, came out 1.5 years, 2 years ago. Rockefeller, she showed a direct relationship, causality between periodontal disease and the autoimmune disease of rheumatoid arthritis. I'm just going from 20 years ago to today. In between, you got the 54. Yeah. You see these links, whether it's a constellation of risk factors, many factors like cardiovascular, or direct causality that they're seeing in rheumatoid. So it's fascinating. And if you knew why it was separated from 1840, you'd shake your head, because it was for political reasons. Because back then, dentistry was a so-called barber profession, because you had barbers extracting teeth, but you also had doctors that were also involved with oral health and oral surgery. So they knocked on the door, these 2 doctors, Chapin Harris was one of them, and they knocked on the door of the first medical school in Baltimore, and they said, let's create a division, of course, of oral health, just like we have of cardiology and this emerging medicine. They said, no, you guys are a bunch of barbers. Go open up your own school. It's called the Grand Rebuke. It's a funny story. And they go up to New York, they raise some money, they come back down, they open up the first dental school, the University of Maryland at Baltimore. And that's how come in the United States it was separated. Just know in Europe, it was always connected up until about 10, 15 years ago. And Harvard is the only dental school that has the dental school part of the medical school. So kudos to Harvard. But time is changing. Times are changing. And we're starting to get this better connectivity between the disciplines of dentistry and medicine.
Speaking of that connectivity, right? You before we jumped on started talking about how you're doing some of that, right? Bringing the medical side in with the dental to make it holistic. And I think there's a lot in the medical community going that way with functional medicine of saying, hey, it's not just this one thing and let's give you a pill. It's what's causing it in the whole human. And the whole human, the thing that consumes all the energy that you expend in a day is potentially the start of that. So how do you view these symbiotically and work today to address the whole human?
When we look at the health of the mouth and the oral microbiome, there's the environment that we put it under. So you talked about longevity and we talked about nutrition. We talked about sleep. We talked about fitness. We talked about stress management, social. We talked about all these things. Well, it really can get easily extrapolated to the environment that we put our body on. And what I've always find so fascinating is the exact same things that we need for overall health, we need for oral health and vice versa. So think about it this way. Sugar is the enemy. Alcohol's an enemy. The ability to be sedentary is the enemy. The ability not to get into deep reparative sleep. All these things that we think about help truly starts in the mouth. And that's why we love to say that oral health, the health of the mouth, and that the good balancing act, and why I think Dr. Oz says this, will lead to overall health. Because the habits, these high performance habits that you build for taking care of the mouth, right? Mechanically removing the plaque every day, doing these habits in a row. And we have a whole deep dive on this because people need to know, hey, what tool do I use? Because there's a lot of, unfortunate noise out there, right? What are the experts saying? What's the research and the science backing it up to use, an electric brush versus a manual brush? What is the Cochrane reports that studied 500, 600, 700 articles on this? So what do they say about flossing? Why do you need to get between the teeth? Well, there's very strong evidence exactly why. What's the best tool can I use? And are there options for me if I can't use string floss? Answer is yes. How do I raise pH of the mouth? Because pH is critical, and that's where we have environmental factors, sodas, and even all the different foods we eat that are high protein have a low pH. So in other words, we start moving away from neutral and we get acid. So proteins, everything with, fish, meat is a lower pH. So we have alkalinizing foods, which is fruits and vegetables, just like mom always told us. And it's a 60-40 balance. That's about what you want, which will give you that very healthy pH. So in our offices, we pH test everybody. It's a standard of care. We test microbiome. We look at the saliva. We want to know what's that oral microbiome. What are the bugs like? Do you have bacteria that can cause inflammation or demineralization and decay or, bad breath? And all of those things have direct lead ups to these cardiovascular disease or all these kind of chronic inflammatory diseases of the body. So it's very interesting of that whole balancing act that we have control of, right? Just like longevity concepts that we're all learning from the functional medicine people and people like Huberman. Well, it's the same thing that we could learn from people who have studied, the importance of oral health.
Well, speaking of that, I mean, it may be really helpful, I know for me, and I imagine for listeners to understand from someone like you what that, to use a Huberman, is a protocol would be. Like what on a daily basis should we be doing versus weekly versus monthly versus annually or, quarterly? What are the different things, right? Because like you said, is it manual versus electric toothbrush, and tongue scraping, water picks, and all the different things, mouth washes or different ones.
I'll go through it. And we have a guide that I'm happy to send over to you that you please share with your listeners, because we started a new practice from scratch. So when you take all the new knowledge and the things that I've learned from the Uptown practice, which is in New York City, and now we're down in Tribeca, we had a blank slate and we built a lot of interesting things that now impact our practices, but we have an order of events that we do things. So the first thing is, you really want to just generally and get the right amount of time. Basically, electric brushes are 5 times more effective than the manual brush. But it's all dependent on technique. Manual brushes, think of I got to hit that tennis backhand just right. But electric brush does all the work for you. All you got to do is hold it and kind of angle it properly and do it for 30 seconds a quadrant. Then you got to get between the teeth. Why do you got to get between the teeth? That's where the periodontal disease is, because you can't, toothbrush doesn't get between those teeth. So you got to mechanically remove any food particles and, of course, the bacteria that form in our saliva, that if you don't remove it, there's a whole, what we call 4 stages of inflammation. So the body over time, and that's why chronic inflammation is so dangerous in the mouth, the body over time thinks it's a foreign invader. So we know what happens with foreign invaders. All of us lived through COVID. We understand that when the immune response gets overwhelmed, our body has a problem, whether it's an autoimmune disease or, unfortunately, over COVID, if you had periodontal disease, you were 5 times more likely to end up on a ventilator. And that just brings it home of, oh my God, that's just like cardiovascular disease and any other organ disease that we had in the body that is inflammatory. So anyway, back to that. So electric brush, then a water flosser or a regular flosser. The beauty of these water flossers is they really remove the plaque and any food particles between your teeth. We love that. We also love the tongue scraper. So the tongue scraper will remove, and that's for your breath, the same bacteria, same type of bacteria that cause gum disease between the teeth. They live without oxygen. So those are called the gram-negative anaerobic bacteria. Anaerobic live without oxygen. That's what causes gum disease between the teeth. That's what causes bad breath that lives in the little recesses of the tongue. Scraper removes it. So tongue scraper is great. And then I love to finish with a mouth rinse. It's called immunity rinse. And I'm completely biased because I've started a product company. My sons did it. It's a product that we invented. But what I want the listener to know is just you want to raise the pH in the mouth in a safe way with no antibiotics. And you want to oxygenate, because when you oxygenate the bad bugs, the balance starts getting into a more favorable balance. So we then finish with immunity rinse. And that's it. And that takes about 3 minutes. You do it in the morning, you do it at night. So you just want to bookend your day with this.
Could I ask on the actual toothpaste that you recommend? Because they're different ingredients and how people think about them.
That's a whole conversation.
Okay.
So let's talk about it. So toothpaste, what's really important is that it's not abrasive. So there's an abrasivity factor that we look at. 70 is very good. And then once you get over 120, 150, 170, it's too abrasive because you don't want to scratch the enamel. So you look at the toothpaste and you find out what is that abrasivity index, and it should be listed. Number one. Number two, we're going to get into a whole fluoride conversation because that's been a big debacle. So I can unpack that one for you. But whether you believe in fluoride or you do, you need to have an active in your toothpaste. Now, they normally come in 2 forms. They're either a fluoride or a potassium nitrate, which also has a very good effect of getting on root surfaces when you have a little recession, decreases in sensitivity, and preventing plaque from sticking to those areas. Fluoride does that topically, helps seal roots, helps make the surface of the enamel nice and smooth so plaque doesn't stick as well. But it also gets into the tooth, especially when you ingest fluoride in the developing tooth. And that molecule of the tooth, which is very hard, it's the hardest mineral of the body, hardest material is enamel. That hydroxyapatite molecule now becomes what's called a fluorapatite molecule. It's like super steel. Now, let's unpack this. Toothpaste has about 1,000 to 1,200 parts per million. And that is safe. And that's why people say, well, how does the ADA not get on fluoride? Because it's such a problem because we got Kennedy talking about this and that and this. And what they're talking about is the extremely high concentrations. And if you know anything about pharmacology and chemicals, it's all dose response. In other words, how much is it? Fluoride has been tested for decades and decades in this country. So at very safe low levels, it works extremely well. There's also, from all the studies, even today when fluoride is in rinses and fluoride could be in water, there's a 25% decrease in decay rates because of all the things I'm talking about. So okay. I got no problem with fluoride at these low levels. I really do not. But if you have problems with fluoride in your water, you know what? Filter it out. But if I had my young kids, I would for sure have fluoride in the toothpaste. Otherwise, your kids are going to have cavities. It's just the way it is. And unfortunately, people who do not have access to care, you take fluoride out of the water, those are the people that are going to suffer because they don't have the ability that all of us have with access to care. So that's just another thing to think about with the unpack of fluoride. And then in toothpaste, look, you don't want to have some of these ingredients. There's sodium lauryl sulfate that causes aphthous ulcers, so you want SLS free. There's more natural, organic ways to kind of get a foaming agent. That's what that is in your toothpaste. So there's a number of toothpaste that I do like, but you want to look at these things. I like these natural, organic kind of vitamin antioxidants in them, but I do like an active like a fluoride and a potassium nitrate also.
That's really helpful. Okay. And so you touched on the daily practice. Are there any things that you suggest people do? I mean, twice a year cleaning and seeing your dentist.
Of course.
But other than that, are there other things kind of on a weekly or monthly or annual basis you suggest people do?
Yeah. So you got to go back to what breaks down the mouth. We call them the mouth breakdowns, right? I'm on a third book coming out in the fall that talks about the connection of the mouth and the body. So that's coming out. It's called Oral, and there are things that break down the mouth. One is, and it's one of the pillars of longevity, is stress, how we stress. And so we clench, we grind, we wear down the teeth. You need a professional to get involved, make sure you don't have muscular problem, make sure there are people who do great stress release, but there are also things that we do with appliances that calms the joint and the jaws down. There's also lasers that we use now called photobiomodulation that also calms the muscles down. There's a great company called M-Face that has a TMJ protocol that just got FDA approval. So you want to get to a professional office that really has the latest technology with the latest knowledge and research, period, end of story. So clenching and stress is one of the mouth breakdowns. Force. The other thing is plaque. How well are we removing the plaque? That's just what we're talking about. Then you need the professional, because if you had an implant or a crown or a veneer, when you had some type of dentistry, you need to be in the dental office probably at least 3 times a year. You need that hygienist, that superstar of the dental practice I call the hygienist, communicating with the patients, make sure that their technique is right, make sure they're spending the right amount of time. And when there's a little inflammation, bam, they get to it early before it becomes a chronic inflammation that then becomes a tooth problem, but then a systemic health problem, right? So it's getting to these problems early, just like anything else. And I truly believe, and we talk about this with a group of us who are involved with DMI, dental medical integration in this country, that dentistry could be a tip of the spear for diagnostics for overall health, because people go to the dentist more than they go to their primary care physician. So you think about it. You go to a great dental office, they make sure you don't have health issues in your mouth. And what's going to happen is those things that you have to do, that environment you have to create in your mouth of health, will be exactly the same environment you're doing for your body. So look at that. You get both things done just by changing your mindset and being knowledgeable about all these things.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I'd like to go back a little bit to, you were talking about early days, 1840, pre-1840, and dentists or the barbers with extraction. And I'd like to talk a little bit more about that world because it's one, I think a lot of people maybe breath from James Nestor and gotten more familiar, or Jaws, the other book in this subject of, we had this idea of crowding and a lot of extraction and shrinking and what it did to our jaw, versus now people like Dr. Belfour was doing with the homeoblock and some of these others for expanders. How do you view that space, and what's interesting there right now?
It's fascinating, it's brilliant, and it's spot on. I'm a tremendous fan of what James Nestor did to raise awareness in this country and beyond of all of these things we need to know. When you look back archaeologically at 400 years, what Corcini did from the Museum of Natural History, where he references in the book where they didn't have an orthodontic problem, nor did they need their wisdom teeth in, because they had these beautiful, gorgeous jaws. And the relationship and the things they did to lead up to those gorgeous jaws versus the modern diet, the soft diet, the bottle feeding versus breastfeeding, and all these types of things. So Sandra Kahn and Paul Ehrlich, also in Jaws that you mentioned, is another great book for the young moms, because they have, if you put those two books together, that bookends people's knowledge of what you need to know, especially as a young parent. So mouth breathing versus nasal breathing, the difference in the formation of your jaws. Imagine you're breathing through your mouth. Our mouth was not designed for breathing. So what happens, the palate gets vaulted. It's a narrow jaw. And so all of a sudden our tongue can't come forward when we're sleeping. And now we have these sleep issues as we get older, which means hypertension, cardiovascular disease, and all these chronic inflammatory diseases. So look at all these things line up.
Not to mention dementia, right? I mean, and then you get into
And dementia and cognitive function, exactly. So this new science is so emerging and it's so fascinating. And there's so many things that if your child has a rhinitis or a nasal blockage, how important it is to get that healed, to get to that ENT and to get it healed and not to wait. If your child is leaning forward and they're becoming long-faced and they're breathing through their mouth, you can see that whole head posture. There are so many things, of course, that can get done now with this interceptive orthodontics, expansion of the maxilla, and also just changing some certain habits early enough. So it's an emerging science in orthodontics, in myofunctional therapy. I lead a team of specialists, so we're very involved with this. So we have every specialty covered, all the way from prosthodontist. There's 3 extra ones of me between the offices. There's periodontist, orthodontist, and pediatric dentist. So when we all collaborate together, and this is one of the keys that I believe deeply, is the future of dentistry is where the specialists really work together in a collaborative environment under one roof, not a referral outside of your office, because you can do that if you have to. But if you have an opportunity to join groups where the specialists and the general dentists are all working together, that collaboration, that team sport is where you can really diagnose and come up with the most comprehensive and smart, appropriate treatment plans for both the young patients and for the adults. So, when we all start looking at these things together, all of the disciplines start working together. Oh, well, let's expand the arch. Oh, I want to improve my aesthetics, but, let's not create an illusion that a tooth is in that position, what may be someone who does a lot of veneers. Let's move the tooth into position. Now we have aligners for 22 years, clear aligners, which is an amazing, amazing orthodontic breakthrough that it's easy for people to move teeth into proper position. And all that diagnostics is now today driven through software, through facial aesthetics. And so the orthodontics is not just about tooth-to-tooth relationship. It's about function. It's about airway. It's about breathing. And of course, when all of those things line up properly, what do you get? You get enhanced facial aesthetics. So I'm just pointing out how for people who are thinking about, where do I take my children? What dentist team do I see? You really need to see that word called a team. You need to have a team approach to what you're doing. So people are weighing in where it's more like grand rounds in dentistry versus a solo climber business model. And we're moving away from that very traditional solo climber that I talked about. For me, early on in my career, that was something I was raising the red flag in my own mind and said, this has to change. And so it's 3.5 decades later, and it's starting to change.
Yeah, and I'm really grateful it had. I mean, my own personal story, I was a swimmer, and so we mouth breathe constantly, right? That's the only way you're doing when you're swimming. And I would hear people mock, mouth breathers, and I was defaulting to it and would snore a lot and had all these issues. And after reading James Nestor's breath book, I went and Dr. Belfort had trained somebody in Atlanta and got a homeoblock. And you can see the before and after, the bone that got built on the top, and did it for my daughter as well. And she went from crowding, just within 6 months, it's beautiful. She doesn't even have to wear it anymore. Like we got to wear, so fixing it at that age, right, a 7-8-year-old is very, very different than waiting till your 40s to try to have to correct decades of things that went wrong. And so I'm so grateful for you and people like you that are helping us live better as a result of this.
Thank you for that. And getting to these issues as early as possible, just like that in our overall body. The faster we diagnose, right, we get upstream, we get away from a sickness model, we're not dealing with breathing or hypertension. We fix that early on. And not only are people going to be healthier in this country, but this GDP percentage of healthcare, which is ridiculously out of whack, 20%, that's going to change as we move away from the sickness model.
Yeah, 20% of GDP, but one in three, every 1 in 3 tax dollars. So all the taxes we pay, 1 in every 3 is going to healthcare as well. So it's really, really tremendous.
It's a compelling argument.
So understanding we need to get to that full stack on the kind of daily and ongoing basis, but not everybody is starting at that same point. What's the one place to start for somebody? You say, hey, if you were going to do one thing starting today to start helping your oral health, and then they could compound and have it stack over time, where would you suggest people start?
I think people need to do a little bit of research wherever they're living, get recommendations to be in a top office if you have access to care, an office that'll work with you, office that has a team approach. I think that's number one, because once you get there, those people will ensure that your oral hygiene regimen, the order by which you do things, what tools you use, getting to problems when they're small, that's where you want to be. It's a focus on health and caring for the patient. And I hate to say it, but it's not about the almighty dollar. It's about helping people. So, you need to find that off. For people, what they need to do at home is to just become knowledgeable. And there's enough information out there and, a little bit of common sense that if you take the time to have these habits, and it's a ritual, this is what I do in the morning. This is what I do with meditation and breath work for the mind and for stress. This is what I do for nutrition. Now I learned that these are the things, right? I know that, social, all these things you're talking about. When I put these things into place, my mind is set properly. I can engage in my day properly. And I started the day off right. And having, we'll call it an oral health game, right? It's like I got game. And you get game in the morning and get game at night. And you have it for your children and you have it for family members. You transfer this data. Knowledge is power. That's where you start. So I think being in a good professional office, but also for the people to really have these high performance habits, to have an oral hygiene game, to know that it's a priority.
There is something, I think, psychologically, what you're saying to that ritual, right? If it's, hey, I start each day, it's just like the first make your bed. Hey, first, look, I've taken care of my health.
Exactly.
I feel good. My mouth feels better. And same before you go to bed, it puts you in the mindset of, oh, now I'm shutting down. It's time for sleep. And so it kind of bookends what you're looking to do.
That's right. I mean, we know. I mean, you were a swimmer. I was a lacrosse player. We know what it took to get to a competitive edge. We know the dedication, the time, and let's use the right word, the discipline.
Yeah.
The discipline to do it, because we know when we did it, how we felt after it, right? And the accomplishments and the team and the feeling and all of that. And it's like that with everything in life. It's just a commitment that we make to ourselves and to the people around us to have that level of discipline, because we will win at the end, from a standpoint of enjoying a life that's filled with health, and then everything can fall into place. I mean, when we think about the most important things, you really got to focus on this engine we were given. We only got one of them. And you really got to learn what are those important things. It doesn't mean you're a maniac about it, but it really means that you're paying attention to these important things in life.
Yeah, and it's certainly clear, speaking with you and seeing everything you've done, your discipline is persistent and consistent, and not just as a practitioner, the lives you touch, but also as an author, as an educator, taking the time to come do this. So thank you so much, Dr. Levine, for all your work and everything you continue to do.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's an honor, actually, totally to be here speaking to you. And I hope we can help people through your podcast, and people can get curious now and go deeper in all these areas.
Yeah, and I certainly want to get the handout.
Oral Health Guide,
yeah,
yes.
I want to share that in the show notes so the listeners have access to that and can learn more about you, of course.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And people, I'm at Dr. John Levine, Jon Levine, on Instagram, and we'll get them the guide, which is called, Smile House, is what we've built, where we have all these specialists under one roof, and then we have this dental medical integration. We have all of these standard of care diagnostics, CAT scans, iTero scans, salivary diagnostics. So we test microbiome, all these things we look as a standard of care, so that we roll up all this information and we can diagnose with data today that we never had it before. We didn't have it 10 years ago. We didn't have a CAT scan. A CAT scan tells us everything from the top of the nose to the airway. We can diagnose sleep today. We can diagnose sinus problems, small jaws, all these structural issues that really are paramount to proper breathing and airway. And so that's a whole science that's nicely emerging, with dentistry and medicine have to be deeply connected to help our patients.
Yeah, I think this is a truly nascent area, this integration that you're talking about. And so
that's right.
I'd be excited as it continues to develop to get you back and things you're learning as it all fits together.
Absolutely. I'd love to do that.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Levine.
Thank you, Andrew. All my best.
Thank you for joining us on today's episode of the Home of Healthspan podcast. And remember, you can always find the products, practices, and routines mentioned by today's guests, as well as many other Healthspan role models on alively.com. Enjoy a lively day.